Sister cheated with my boyfriend of 8 years, and they got married. But now she has big news and parents announce it at my wedding. Ever since I can remember, my younger sister was the star of the family. She got the princess treatment the moment she popped into this world. I was only 5 years old, but I could already sense the shift in our home's atmosphere. From a balanced family vibe to a one-kid show starring her. My parents, well, they went all out for her from the get-go. Her nursery was something out of a magazine, filled with the best of everything. The fanciest crib, the softest blankets, and toys that were more fit for a showroom than a baby's room. I, on the other hand, got the basics and nothing more. My stuff was mostly hand-me-downs or whatever was on sale. Don't get me wrong, I didn't lack necessities, but the difference in how we were treated was stark and clear. As we grew older, this trend continued. Birthdays were a big tell. Her parties were the talk of the town. Theme decorations, entertainers, and a guest list that included not just kids, but important adults in our parents' lives. My birthdays? They were mostly quiet affairs, maybe a cake, some balloons, and a small family gathering. It wasn't that I wanted lavish parties, but a little bit of that attention wouldn't have hurt. School life was another arena where the differences were glaring. She always had the newest clothes and gadgets. I remember feeling a bit embarrassed with my worn-out backpack and clothes that clearly screamed hand-me-down. At school, she was Miss Popular, and I was the quiet kid who read a lot. Teachers would often praise her for her charm and outgoing nature, while my good grades usually went unnoticed, unless it was parent-teacher meeting day. This unequal treatment even seeped into how our parents supported our interests. She wanted to take ballet? Sure, let's enroll her in the best dance school. I wanted to play soccer? Why don't you try something less rough, they'd say. It was always about keeping her in a bubble of perfection. Holidays were no exception. Christmas was all about what she wanted. The living room would be filled with her wish list items come Christmas morning. I got gifts too, sure, but they were more like afterthoughts. It was like they ticked off a list for me, but for her, they sought to make every wish come true. Emotionally, things were just as skewed. Any achievement of hers was celebrated with great enthusiasm. Got a part in the school play? Let's take everyone out for dinner. I got used to downplaying my own achievements because I knew they wouldn't cause much of a stir. It wasn't outright neglect, but it felt pretty close. The real kicker was how manipulative she became as we got older. She knew she was the favorite and played that card any chance she got. If we ever got into a squabble, guess who was expected to apologize first? Yep, me. And if I ever brought up how unfair it was, my parents would shut it down with the classic, "She's younger, let it go." I tried to find my own space, my own thing that she couldn't touch or taint. I got into writing. It was my escape, a world where I could control what happened and who mattered. My parents didn't really get it, but it wasn't something she could overshadow, so they let me be mostly. Things really started to come to a head during our teenage years. As we both started to carve out our identities, the contrast between us became even sharper. She was the life of every party, the center of every event, and I was the observer, the chronicler. Our paths diverged so much that we barely spoke at home. It was like living with a stranger who shared your last name and nothing else. Living with a sister who's treated like royalty isn't all it's cracked up to be, especially when you're not the one wearing the crown. As we stepped into our teenage years, my sister's entitled attitude didn't just grow, it exploded. She had always been the favorite, but now she wielded her status like a queen in her court, and we were all just subjects. She had this way of walking into a room as if she owned it. At home, this meant that whatever she wanted, she got without question. New phone? Done? Late curfew? No problem. Meanwhile, I had to negotiate like a diplomat for even the smallest freedoms or upgrades. Her entitlement wasn't limited to tangible things either. She demanded attention and got it in heaps. Our parents hung on her every word, laughed at her jokes, and basked in her social successes. I swear, you'd think she invented the wheel the way they bragged about every little thing she did. School was her domain. She became even more popular, and it wasn't just because she was fun or charming, it was also because she knew how to manipulate her image and people around her. Her birthday parties turned into legendary events. I remember one year she threw a massive party that was literally the talk of the school for months. Invites were coveted like golden tickets. My own invitations were more like courtesy copies, handed out because it would look bad if the sister wasn't invited. Clothes and gadgets were just part of her curated image. She always had the latest styles, the newest phone, and the coolest accessories. If I ever got something nice, it was usually after she'd gotten it first or deemed it unworthy of her collection. I couldn't help but feel a bit like her shadow, even in the way I dressed. My wardrobe was mostly filled with her hand-me-downs that were still better than anything new I could afford on my own. Her academic life was another stage for her performance. She wasn't just good at school, she was good at making sure everyone knew she was good. When she got an A, It wasn't just a good grade, it was a triumph. Meanwhile, I maintained a solid A average with minimal fuss and recognition. It was expected of me, not celebrated. Our parents fed into her narrative constantly. They were her biggest fans and promoters. If she was part of a school play, not only would they attend every performance, but they'd also invite extended family and friends, turning it into a mini fan convention. If I was in the same play, oh, make sure to watch your sister. She has such a significant role. Then, there were the family gatherings. These were showcases for her to shine. She'd monopolize conversations, charming relatives with exaggerated stories of her exploits. I was often relegated to the sidelines, chiming in with supportive laughter or nods. It was exhausting, but any attempt to share my own experiences was quickly overshadowed by another one of her captivating tales. But her entitlement wasn't just annoying, it was destructive. She had a knack for twisting situations to her advantage. One time, we both had our eyes on the same dress for a family wedding. I saw it first, but by the time we went shopping, she threw such a fit about how it was the only dress that worked for her, and our parents caved like a house of cards. I ended up with a backup option, which was fine, but it was the principle of the thing. She wanted it, so she got it. Her manipulative skills were not just limited to our parents. She had a way of turning friends against each other if it suited her. Her group of friends was more like her court, where she was the unchallenged queen. I watched her once, at one of her extravagant parties, laughingly pit two of her so-called best friends against each other over some trivial matter just to entertain the rest of her group. It was all a game to her. The worst part? If ever there was a conflict or a problem, somehow I was the one who had to apologize or make concessions. It was always, "She's your younger sister, try to be understanding." Or, "She didn't mean it like that, you know how she is." It didn't matter the situation. The outcome was the same. She was right, and I needed to adjust. Living with her growing sense of entitlement was like walking on eggshells, but the eggshells were rigged with explosives. Any wrong step, any failure to play along with her version of reality was met with drama. And the drama was always somehow my fault for not supporting her, for not being the good big sister. I was in my senior year of high school, balancing the stress of upcoming college applications with the everyday drama that seemed to follow my sister around like a loyal puppy. She was in full social butterfly mode, her entourage ever expanding, her parties more lavish, and her demands increasingly outrageous. My parents were as blind as ever to the imbalance, their eyes glazed with pride for their little star. During this time, I had been dating Jake for about 2 years. He was my refuge, the calm in the storm of my home life. He knew all about the family dynamics, having witnessed more than his fair share of my sister's tantrums and my parents' indulgences. He was supportive, caring, and, importantly, he was mine. Or so I thought. The lead up to the disaster began innocuously enough. Jake and I were planning to go to the same college, dreaming of escaping our small town and starting fresh together. We had it all mapped out. We'd study hard, earn our degrees, and build a life together away from the constant drama that defined my family life. But as senior year progressed, I noticed a shift in Jake's behavior. He became distant, distracted, and our plans for the future were discussed less and less. I chalked it up to pre-college nerves and the pressure of finals. I tried talking to him about it, but he brushed off my concerns with assurances that everything was fine. Then came the night of the big blowout. It was supposed to be a typical weekend party at my house, hosted by my sister, of course. The house was decked out, music blaring, people everywhere. I wasn't really in the party mood, but I figured I'd stick close to Jake and ride it out. Halfway through the night, I started looking for Jake. He wasn't by the makeshift bar in the backyard or hanging out by the pool. I checked upstairs, thinking maybe he'd gone to use the bathroom and got caught up talking to someone. That's when I heard them. Voices from my sister's room. At first, I thought nothing of it. It was her room after all. She was probably just showing off her latest shopping haul or something. But then I recognized Jake's laugh, a sound I adored, now coming from behind her closed door. My heart sank. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe they were just talking. Maybe it was a group hangout and I was overreacting. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder. The talking stopped. The door opened a crack, and there was my sister, looking like she'd been caught but too arrogant to care. Behind her I could see Jake, his expression a mix of guilt and confusion. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Chill, we were just talking," my sister said, her tone dismissive. "Yeah, just catching up," Jake added, but he couldn't meet my eyes. The room felt hot, the air thick with betrayal. I pushed the door open wider and saw it, her makeup on his shirt, his jacket thrown carelessly on her chair. It was clear as day, and yet I couldn't believe it. I felt like I was outside my body watching this disaster unfold. The confrontation was messy. There were tears, shouting, accusations flying. My sister, true to form, turned on her charm, playing the victim, saying it was all a big misunderstanding. Jake fumbled with apologies, trying to explain, but nothing he said made sense. The aftermath was brutal. I broke up with Jake that night. It wasn't just about him cheating. It was who he cheated with. My sister had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I couldn't even look at her, let alone speak to her. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and for what? A moment of thrill? To prove she could have anyone she wanted, even my boyfriend? My parents, of course, were useless. They tried to mediate, suggesting we all sit down and talk it out like it was just a minor disagreement. "She's your sister," they said, as if that excused her actions. "Family is forever." But I couldn't accept it. Not this time. After the fallout with my sister and Jake, things spiraled pretty quickly. It was like someone had knocked over a line of dominoes in my life, and I was just watching them fall, one after the other. The entire fiasco with Jake and my sister was the final straw. That was the moment I decided my sister was, for all intents and purposes, dead to me. In the weeks following that disaster of a party, I lived in a fog. Everything felt numb, unreal, like I was walking through a dream, or more accurately, a nightmare. I couldn't face my sister at home. Every time I saw her, the hurt and betrayal came rushing back. She seemed to carry on as if nothing had happened, still the golden child, unscathed and untouchable. I withdrew even more from my family, spending most of my time either locked in my room or at a friend's house. My parents tried to intervene, of course. They suggested family therapy, thinking it could mend what was broken. But how could therapy fix this? How could it erase the image of my boyfriend and my sister together? How could it make me trust either of them again? The idea of sitting in a therapist's office talking about my feelings while they sat there playing the victim was unbearable. I refused. I told my parents in no uncertain terms that there was no way I was going to sit and play happy families. This wasn't some small misunderstanding. It was a betrayal of the worst kind. My parents didn't push it too much after I blew up at them. I think they finally understood how deep the wound went. Or maybe they just decided to focus on my sister, who was always their priority anyway. She seemed to revel in the attention, playing the misunderstood princess to perfection. In the midst of all this, college couldn't come soon enough. I was counting down the days until I could leave, start fresh, and put as much distance as possible between me and my sister. When the acceptance letter from my college came, it felt like a lifeline. I'd been accepted to a school a few states away, far enough to make random visits unlikely. Packing up my things and leaving home was bittersweet. I was leaving behind everything familiar, but I was also leaving behind so much pain. My mom cried when I left. My dad gave me a stiff hug. My sister? She gave a half-hearted goodbye, as if she was still trying to figure out how to play the victim in my departure. Starting college was like breathing fresh air for the first time in months. I threw myself into my studies and made new friends who knew nothing of my past or my family drama. I relished the anonymity, the chance to be just another student, not the girl whose sister stole her boyfriend. But moving on wasn't as easy as I'd hoped. The scars from what happened lingered. Trusting new people was hard. I kept waiting for them to betray me like Jake and my sister had. Relationships were even harder. I dated a bit, but nothing serious. The fear of being hurt again held me back. As for my family, our communication dwindled to occasional calls and texts. My parents always asked about my return for holidays, but I always had an excuse ready. Schoolwork, exams, a trip with friends, anything to avoid going back to that house. Years passed, and with them, the sharpness of the betrayal dulled a bit. I heard through the grapevine, aka my mom, that my sister had gotten married to Jake. They had even invited me to the wedding, but I didn't go, of course. That chapter of my life was closed. She was still dead to me, no matter who she married. Graduation came, and my parents attended. It was a strained visit, full of awkward silences and forced conversations. My sister didn't come. She was too busy with her new life, probably for the best. After college, I moved even further away, taking a job on the opposite coast. It was a new beginning in a new city, where no one knew my history. I built a life there, found a career I loved, and eventually met someone. He was kind and understanding, and when I finally told him about my past, he didn't judge. He just listened and supported me. It took years, but I learned to trust again, to love again. My relationship with my family never fully recovered, though. I kept in touch with my parents, but it was always superficial. As for my sister, she remained a person from my past, someone I used to know, but no longer recognized. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if cutting her off was too extreme. But then I remember the pain, the betrayal, and I know I made the right choice for me. Protecting myself had to come first, and if that meant cutting ties, then so be it. In the end, declaring my sister dead to me wasn't about punishing her. It was about saving myself. It was about finding a way to move on from a betrayal that had cut me to the core. And move on I did, slowly but surely, building a life that was mine and no one else's. Getting married should have been one of the happiest times in my life, and it was, mostly. Planning my wedding was like sketching out dreams on paper, watching them take shape in the form of flower arrangements, venue bookings, and dress fittings. But even as I planned my perfect day, the shadow of my past, specifically my sister, loomed over it like an uninvited cloud. Mark, my fiancé, knew all about the history with my sister. He was my rock, always there with a kind word or a listening ear whenever the stress of wedding planning got tangled up with family drama. He understood why my sister wasn't on the guest list, and he supported that decision without question. As the wedding day approached, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. I was eager to start my new life with Mark, but I dreaded the inevitable family complications. My parents had been surprisingly okay with most of my decisions regarding the wedding, but the issue of my sister was a sticking point. They repeatedly suggested I reconsider and invite her for the family's sake, but I stood firm. After all that had happened, having her there was a line I wasn't willing to cross. The big day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance I had dreamed of. The venue was a beautiful garden, blooming with the flowers of late spring, the air filled with the scent of roses and jasmine. It was like walking into a living fairy tale, with twinkling lights strung from trees and the gentle hum of music in the background. Our friends and family gathered, a buzz of happy chatter filling the air as they awaited the ceremony. I was in the bridal suite, putting on the finishing touches with my bridesmaids, when my mom knocked on the door. She came in, looking nervous. "Honey, I really wish you'd reconsider about your sister," she began, her voice trembling a bit. "It would mean so much to have her here." I took a deep breath, fixing my gaze on my reflection in the mirror. "Mom, we've been over this. She made her choices and I've made mine. Today is about me and Mark, not her." Mom looked like she wanted to say more, but she left it at that, giving me a tight smile before leaving to take her seat. The ceremony was everything I had hoped it would be. Mark looked handsome as ever, his eyes glistening with emotion as I walked down the aisle. We exchanged vows, our voices steady despite the swell of emotions. As we were pronounced husband and wife, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was done. We were married, and it had been perfect. But the reception was another story. We had just finished our first dance and were sitting down for dinner when my dad asked to say a few words. I nodded, expecting the usual fatherly expressions of pride and joy. Instead, he took the microphone and turned the attention to my sister. "I know we are all thrilled for my daughter and Mark, but I'd like to take a moment to talk about someone who couldn't be here today," he began, and my heart sank. He went on to talk about my sister, her recent struggles, how she wished she could be here, and how she recently lost her baby and how we should all think of her tonight. I felt my face flush with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Whispers rippled through the room as guests turned to look at me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and sympathy. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Dad, please," I interrupted. "Today is about me and Mark. Let's keep it that way." Dad looked taken aback, but he handed the microphone back to the DJ and sat down without another word. The mood had shifted, the air now tinged with tension. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I tried to focus on the guests who were there to celebrate with us, on the joy of the day. But the incident with my dad cast a long shadow over everything. Mark squeezed my hand under the table, his silent support a lifeline in the turbulent sea of emotions. Later, during the toasts, my best friend gave a speech about friendship and loyalty, her words a subtle nod to the journey I'd been through. It was the salve I needed, and I found myself laughing and crying in equal measure. The wedding was beautiful, and despite the hiccup, it was still one of the happiest days of my life. But it also reinforced a truth I had known for a long time. My sister, even in her absence, could stir up storms in my life like no one else. As Mark and I drove away from the venue, my wedding dress bundled around me in the car, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I was married to the love of my life, and yet the family drama that had shadowed so much of my life had intruded on this special day too. I realized then that no matter how far I went, there would always be threads that tied me back to my family, to my sister. But now, with Mark by my side, I felt stronger, ready to face whatever came our way. Together, we would navigate the complexities of family. carving out a space for ourselves where peace and love could flourish, away from the shadows of the past. The wedding had passed, but the echoes of that day, particularly the moment my dad decided to bring up my sister, lingered like a bad aftertaste. I'd hoped that once Mark and I returned from our honeymoon, the dust would have settled. But if there's one thing I've learned from all this family drama, it's that some dust never really settles. It just waits for the next breeze to kick it up again. It wasn't long after we got back that the phone calls started. First, it was my mom, her voice a mix of concern and criticism, telling me how hurt my dad was that I'd cut him off during his speech. She painted him as the victim, just a father caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace in the family. I listened, biting back the urge to remind her of all the times they hadn't kept the peace for me. Then came the call from my aunt, who'd always been more of a mediator in the family. She was gentler, suggesting maybe it was time to mend fences, to let bygones be bygones. But how could I let bygones be bygones when the past kept crashing into my present? The real kicker came one evening when I was cooking dinner, and Mark handed me the phone, his eyebrows knitted in concern. It was my dad. "Your mother and I think it's time we all had a talk," he said, his voice stern, the familiar tone of authority that had dictated much of my childhood. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my grip tightening around the phone. "Talk about what, Dad? How you used my wedding as a platform to talk about her?" He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "It's not just about the wedding. It's about this rift in the family. It's about your sister. It's about us." I felt a tiredness seep into my bones, the kind of tiredness that comes from having the same argument over and over. "I don't see what there is to talk about. What's done is done. She made her choices, and I made mine. We're still your family, and we—" I cut him off, the years of frustration boiling over. "Yeah, and where was this family when I was hurting? Where was this concern when I felt like an outsider in my own home?" There was silence on the other end, the kind that said more than words ever could. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, less certain. "We just want to fix this." "Maybe it can't be fixed," I said, the finality in my own voice surprising even me. The call ended shortly after, and I was left standing in the silence of my kitchen, the echoes of the conversation ringing in my ears. The following weeks were a barrage of family opinions. Everyone had something to say, a piece of advice to offer, a judgment to pass. My family, it seemed, had plenty of voices, but not many listeners. The real confrontation, however, was still to come. It happened at a family gathering a few months later, a birthday party for my uncle. I'd been reluctant to go, but Mark convinced me that it might be a chance to clear the air. "Maybe it's time," he'd said, ever the optimist. The party was in full swing when we arrived, the backyard buzzing with relatives and laughter. I plastered on a smile, prepared to play the part of the dutiful niece for the evening. But then I saw her, my sister, standing there across the yard, laughing, her head thrown back in that carefree way she had. My heart stopped just for a moment, and all the old wounds flared anew. I was about to turn and leave when she spotted me and started walking over. Every step she took felt like an intrusion, a violation of the distance I'd put between us. "Hey," she said, her voice casual, as if we were just two acquaintances at a party. "Hi," I replied, my voice cool, distant. She hesitated, then seemed to gather her courage. "Look, I know things have been bad between us, but I'm hoping we can start to move past it." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just my sister, but the embodiment of all the pain and betrayal I'd felt. "Move past it? How can I do that? How can you stand there and act like what you did was just some minor mistake?" She flinched, but then her face settled into a mask of defiance. "I made a mistake, I know, but aren't families supposed to forgive?" "Forgiveness doesn't erase the consequences," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking inside. "What you did, what you chose to do, it changed everything." The conversation grew heated, voices raising, old grievances aired like dirty laundry. Relatives turned to look, forming a semicircle around us. It was like some twisted audience waiting to see how the drama would unfold. Finally, I'd had enough. "This isn't the time or the place," I said, cutting through the noise. "And I don't think there will ever be a right time or place for us to resolve this." I walked away then, leaving her standing there among the whispers and stares. Mark was at my side in an instant, his presence a comforting warmth. The next day was eerily quiet. My phone, usually buzzing with texts and calls from family trying to mediate or take sides, was silent. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Mark, seeing my anxiety, tried to lighten the mood, but the tension was a thick fog in our home. Then the calls started. First, it was my aunt, the family peacemaker, her voice soft and worried. "You know your parents are just devastated," she began, but I cut her off. "Aunt Linda, I love you, but I can't do this right now. I need some space." She was hurt, I could tell, but she understood. She always did. Next was my mom. Her approach was different, tinged with anger and disappointment. "How could you embarrass us like that in front of the whole family?" she demanded. "Mom, this isn't about you or Dad. This is about me and my life, and the choices I'm making for my own well-being," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's always about you, isn't it?" she shot back before hanging up. Her words stung, echoing in my mind long after the call ended. Days turned into weeks, and the divide within the family deepened. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly reaching out, some to offer support, others to criticize. My decision to cut ties with my sister had ripple effects I hadn't anticipated, affecting relationships I thought were unshakable. The hardest hit, unsurprisingly, was my relationship with my parents. They were caught between their two daughters, one they had always favored, and another they didn't know how to support without causing conflict. Conversations with them were strained, filled with awkward silences and unsaid words. As for my sister, she became a topic we all avoided. It was as if mentioning her might reignite the flames we were all desperately trying to smother. But avoidance didn't heal the wounds, it just covered them up for a while. Mark and I found ourselves discussing our future, contemplating moves and changes that would put physical distance between us and my family. "Maybe a fresh start is what we need," Mark suggested one evening, his arm around me as we sat watching the sun set from our porch. I considered it. A new city, new jobs, new people. It was tempting, an escape from all the drama. But then a new resolve settled over me. Running away wasn't the answer. I needed to face this, to rebuild my life on my terms, not just escape the parts that were hard. So we stayed. Instead of running, I focused on building. I threw myself into work, into my passions. I started a blog, sharing my experiences and connecting with others who had gone through similar family estrangements. The response was overwhelming, and I found a sense of purpose in helping others navigate their own turbulent family waters. Mark and I also worked on strengthening our bond, knowing that our foundation needed to be solid if we were to weather the storms together. We attended couples therapy, learned better communication skills, and made sure to carve out time for each other, away from the shadow of my family drama. Months passed, and slowly, the sharp edges of the fallout began to soften. Some family members drifted away, unable or unwilling to accept my decisions. Others, surprisingly, grew closer, their support a balm on the raw edges of my hurt. Holidays were the hardest. The first Christmas after the confrontation, I declined the family gathering, choosing instead to volunteer at a local shelter. It was bittersweet, serving others while knowing my own family was fractured. But it was also empowering, a step toward reclaiming my agency in how I chose to live my life. As for my parents, our relationship eventually found a new normal. It was never the same as it had been before, but maybe that was okay. We learned to navigate around the sensitive topics, to focus on the here and now rather than the tangled past. And my sister? We didn't speak for years. It was a silence that spoke volumes, each of us living our lives in parallel universes that rarely intersected. I heard about her through the family grapevine, her kids, her moves, her life. It was strange, hearing about someone who had once been my closest confidant as if she were a distant acquaintance. In the end, the confrontation and its fallout taught me a lot about myself. I learned that I was stronger than I had thought, capable of making tough decisions for the sake of my own health and happiness. I learned that family isn't always defined by blood, but by the people who stand by you when the ground falls away. And I learned that healing is not a straight line, but a complex journey with ups and downs. A journey best navigated with honesty, resilience, and above all, hope. So, while the fallout was messy, painful, and complicated, it was also the catalyst for a new beginning, one where I stood firmly at the center of my own story, no longer a supporting character in someone else's drama. And with each passing day, I grew more confident that no matter what the future held, I was ready to face it on my own terms.